back, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed today's program so far, and I hope you've been tracking the journey that we've been on, going from individual behavior change and lifestyle changes that we could consider, the connection with community and our natural environment, intergenerational connections, and the resilience that we can support in each other. And in our last session, actually going deeper under the surface and looking at the spiritual core and how we need to change our perspectives, or how we can consider different perspectives to create a healthier future for both people and planet. So we're going to change track a little bit here, switching from our collaborative speakers to our keynote, Dr. Lyla Johnston, and we are delighted that Dr. Johnston was available to join us today, given her alignment with some of the principles that you've been hearing about throughout the day of interconnection, reciprocity, and responsibility. So Dr. Lyla Johnston is an Indigenous musician, author, and community organizer of Diné, Cheyenne, and European lineages. Her multi-genre presentation style has engaged audiences across the globe towards personal, collective, and ecological healing. She blends her study of human ecology at Stanford, graduate work in Indigenous pedagogy, and the traditional worldview she grew up with to inform her music, perspectives, and solutions. Her doctoral research focused on the ways in which pre-colonial Indigenous nations shaped large regions of Turtle Island, aka the Americas, to produce abundant food systems for humans and non-humans. So Dr. Johnston is going to be speaking on inner and outer landscapes, holistic health lessons from pre-colonial Native American land management. So thank you, Dr. Johnston.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all. Even though I can't see you, I know you're out there somewhere. Really enjoying the theme of this conference, really enjoying the spirit of this conference to bring health to our people and to our Mother Earth. And I am really appreciative of the ways in which each of you dedicate your lives to making the world a better place for others. I think that in and of itself is the most powerful medicine. And it's the medicine that's always been around since time immemorial, the love of people towards each other and towards Mother Earth. And so I'm excited to be a small part of this. And I just hope you all keep going and never give up and never lose hope to continue to fight even when it's hard, so that we can look back and say, even though things were challenging, we never stopped. We never stopped working for love. We never stopped working for and fighting for a better world for future generations. And the victory will be so satisfying, decades from now when we see all of our work. So just remember, it all matters. Okay, today I'm going to talk about my dissertation research, which is not as boring as that might sound. Should be fun, hopefully. The title of the dissertation is Architects of Abundance, and it really looks into Indigenous regenerative ecosystem design. And what I have on here is a picture, an artist's rendition of the Florida riverbanks. And this is real archaeological sites that we find along the river of oyster shells. And we know through these archaeological sites that Turtle Island, or what we now call America, was an abundant place. Before I begin, I just want to introduce my clans, as is proper and customary in the Diné Nation. So yaat shik ara shidane she nanisht ejitrachi ninshle successes bashishin ashin hindashichedo bilagane edashinale akwit ego dene astanishle. I just was stating that I am the Nanisht Ejitachitni clan of the Diné Nation, and we get our clans from our mothers. So that's my mother's name, clan name, and we're a matrilineal people. And I also honored my other lines as well, my other four other three grandparents. So getting right into this, I think it's really important to remember that the health of the earth is a reflection of the health of the people. And conversely, the health of our hearts directly impacts the health of the planet. If we are not healthy in our spirits and in our minds and in our hearts, sometimes we can act in ways that damage the world around us. So this term here you see, regenerative, is the key term we're going to focus on, is developing an inner landscape of stewardship mentality, being a warrior for the earth, caring about animals as equals, which generates a regenerative society. So societies that are whole within, so that they can then go out and create a world that is whole outside of themselves. So let's get into it. I'm going to go over many examples here of ancient and contemporary Indigenous practices and the ethics that drive them. This is a Ahupua'a system of Hawaii, the herring roe farms of the Heiltsuk in British Columbia, the floodplain systems of the Baude Indigenous Nation in Bolivia, and then lastly is the alluvial farming techniques of my people in the desert. So we're going to go onward. So the first example I'm going to give hopefully shows you that when guided by the proper inner landscape, the proper mental health and spiritual health, human beings can create beautiful, beautiful things. So one of the beautiful things that we create when we have strong mental health, strong spiritual health, an example of that is the Shawnee chestnut groves, which occurred because the Shawnee had refined over millennia a way of working with the land and a way of working with each other. So these chestnuts used to grow from Maine all the way down to Georgia. And these chestnuts provided the caloric base to feed many, many, many people. It was these chestnuts that allowed them to scale their population sizes up and support vast amounts of human beings before Columbus was ever born. So these chestnut groves, unfortunately, started growing close together after they wiped out the native people, because the native people used to space them properly. And when you space them properly, each tree, like this one on the right-hand side, artist rendition of an old chestnut, it actually has enough sunlight, enough nutrients, enough water to grow and be a big tree and billow out. Whereas sometimes if you have all the trees growing close together, like we see in a lot of the national forests, those trees are growing tall and skinny, fighting for the sunlight, and they're not allowed to really be a tree because they're competing with too many of each other. So part of our forestry management for time immemorial was to space the trees and thin the forest so that the selected old growth nut producing trees would be privileged among them. And then we would have a constant burning around those trees. This left-hand side picture is the Tsalagi Cherokee Nation standing beside one of their old growth chestnuts. So once they killed about 98% of Indigenous peoples on the eastern coast, the trees went into shock because the people who used to thin them and space them were gone. So they started to, those seeds dropped, the chestnuts dropped, created saplings, and they started to grow really close together. When they grow really close together, they were competing with each other too much. And they also created basically weak immune systems in the trees. And when they're all close together, disease can spread faster. So they got wiped out by the blight. So nearly all the American chestnuts today are gone due to this really severe blight that wiped them out. Now, these chestnuts were not wilderness. They weren't just here based on how natural, ecosystemic forces just created them. They were human made. In other words, if humans weren't there, these chestnut groves would not have grown from Maine all the way down to Georgia. And that's because they were healthy on the inside. They could take care of the world healthily on the outside. And I'll get to that in a little bit. So this, what I'm about to show you is a graph of soil core that was taken out of a pond in Kentucky. Now, this soil core has multiple layers of fossilized pollen recorded in it. And so when we examine this soil core, we can see and reconstruct the forest composition over time. And so on the left-hand side, you're going to see time. And the further down, the older the sediment is, right? Because the old sediment is the pollen falls on the pond, goes to the base of the pond, fossilizes, and then more falls on top of that, on top of that, on top of that. So the higher you go in the soil core, the younger the sediment is. So this soil core has 9,500 years worth of information. So on the left-hand side, you'll see this time, 9,500 years. If you go on this 3,000-year line, you start to see here in the fifth column to the right, the chestnut pollen comes out of nowhere very strongly about 3,000 years ago in this area. We also see hickory nut coming in really strong. And about 2,000 years ago, we see black walnut come out of nowhere, right? There's none, and then there's a lot. We also see some domesticated plants that indigenous peoples domesticated long ago, such as sunflower coming into the record really strongly, goosefoot, and sumpweed as well. And on the right-hand side is very interesting. We see a fossilized charcoal record. We see lots of charcoal coming into the record. And this indicates that 3,000 years ago, Shawnee people moved in and created a biodiverse food forest, which they managed through the routine burning of the forest floor. So by burning the forest floor, you're keeping those competing saplings down. You're keeping all the competing vegetation down. And because you're burning so frequently, you never really have big forest fires. You just have these little brush fires that kind of clear out the bottom of the forest, open up pasturage, open up grasslands for deer and bison to come in and forage. And you also have open meadows for travel. So the colonizers always remarked how easy it was to travel in American forests when they first got here because they were so neatly kept and the trees so widely spaced. And this was all a very deliberate, intentional garden. And you can see they sustained this food system for 3,000 years. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about what kind of inner landscape, what kind of health we need to have in our hearts and spirits in order to sustain something for that long. But I'm going to give a few more examples first. So one of the things I like to talk about is the Kwakwa clam gardens. So these clam gardens are intertidal rock walls that are placed along the coastline. And so when the tide comes up, the rock walls catch all of the sediment and water behind it. So you create these calmer, warmer pools, which are perfect for clam habitat. And you see on the right-hand side, this dark line, that is a man-made anthropogenic clam garden wall that is done by rolling stones down and building them up so that they create these pools. And so these are radiocarbon dated to be 3,500 years old. So these are ancient technologies that because they built them throughout the land, they were able to scale up the clam habitat and have many, many more clams available to them and to the minks and the otters and the water birds. So they've done some studies and they've seen that 35% of the coastline was augmented to create these ancient clam gardens in Quadra Island, which is just above Vancouver. So it's pretty phenomenal, the scale at which human beings were able to augment clam habitat. And what's really important about this specific case study is that they see the clams as their equals. And so the clam, it's just a mollusk, but it's so sacred to them that they see it as their equal. And they see it as having its own nationhood status. And so that's part of that inner gardening that we need to do, is we need to understand that we are not the most important species on the planet. We are not more important than anything else. We are equal. And so until we understand that, we're going to keep running our heads against the wall as it pertains to ecosystems health, because we keep sacrificing the ecosystems and other species for our own benefit, as if we were like the only thing in the universe, which we're not. So a really important part of gardening our inner hearts is something they call bioegalitarianism. This notion that all things are important, all things are equal, not only in a little sense, but these clams are even seen as relatives, as family members. So not only are we all equal, but we're all family. And when we can get to the point where we see everything as our own kin, then we will be truly civilized. Then we can truly have a functional society. We can't operate as if we're in a vacuum, right? Like humans are the only thing, the center of the universe. In fact, that's really childish and really immature. And I hope we evolve out of that immaturity soon. Okay, so the next thing I like to talk about is American grasslands pyro management. So the Illinois Confederacy shaped and altered much of this region. This is from a scientific article, as an anthropogenic creation. Like many other indigenous groups in North America, their most important tool was fire. Burning the prairies, they made the grasses hospitable for grazers and managed prairie as a game reserve to maximize productivity. Now, what that means is that when you burn a grassland, you are actually helping it stay in a grassland state. If you don't burn a grassland, it can turn into shrubland, it can turn into a mesic forest, it can turn into a very woody environment. Versus if you constantly burn the same patch, maybe once every 3 years, every 5 years even, you can keep it in a grassland state. And that will actually support herbivores who need grass to have food. So even though it seems destructive, you're actually augmenting the life by attracting herbivores, which can help soil health, which can also help with the fertilization through their fecal matter. And so you're actually inviting and encouraging the immigration of deer, bison, elk, etc., which are part and parcel of a healthy ecosystem. So fire is not only, can it be destructive, it can be very, very creative. It can be a force of creation. So burning was so important in Native cultures that the Miamia Indigenous nation has a lunar calendar, and their September moon is called the grass burning moon. And so the Miamia nation is indigenous to what we now call the Ohio River Valley. And the Miamia nation are beautiful people, extraordinary people, and burning the grasses was so important to them that they institutionalized it into their calendrical system, such that every September, when the full moon came, they knew it was time to go out and do their covenant, do their sacred duty of applying fire in a gentle way to recycle those dead plant tissues into nutrient-dense ash that will then feed the soil and bring up really rich ash. There's really cool photos of grasslands that have been burnt side by side, ones that haven't, like the same area, but just they burned one side of it, but not the other. And the other side is just booming with all this greenery and life. And the other side is doing good, but the plants are like half as tall. And so it's very interesting. So in one of the Miamia publications, they say, Insasha Kayolia Kilshwa, or the grass burning moon, we see fire as something that restores and gives new life to the prairie. Fire helps clear the land of old grass and brush and open seed pods that have fallen to the ground. Because of fire, new flowers and plants emerge in the spring. So a lot of plants became pyro-adapted to indigenous fire because, as you saw with the chestnut example, we were burning for thousands of years in the same place. And so a lot of plants and animals co-evolved with that ash, with that fire. And some seeds actually need fire now to break down the husk so that the seed can reach the soil and germinate, such as echinacea. That's one of the medicines that our people gave to the world, one of many medicines, as you may know. Indigenous peoples really contributed heavily to American medicine through a lot of, pirating of our technologies. But one of those is echinacea. And a lot of medicine plants thrive in the wake of fire, actually. It's very fascinating how fire manages to bring medicine to our lives. So on the left-hand side, there's a book called Forgotten Fires. It's really fascinating. It was written in 1908, and it is every single diary entry this guy could get his hands on of colonizers saying, wow, the Indians are burning again. Oh, the Indians are burning again. Oh, the soil is so black and luscious because the Indians burn here all the time. Or, oh, wow, this grassland is so luxuriant. It's because the natives always burn here. And so he goes state by state across the country to show how Indigenous peoples were burning every corner of this continent in a regenerative, healthy fashion. And actually, those fires prevent the big, scary fires. Because when you don't burn for hundreds of years, which is what has happened in this country, the leaves build up, the sticks, the branches, the debris, the fuel load builds up, builds up, builds up. And then all the trees are going close together, right? Because all the saplings are coming up. None of them are getting thinned out, right? So you have a forest with a lot of trees side by side, sucking up water in the water table, over competing for the water, competing against each other, drying each other out. As they're growing bigger and bigger, they need more water. So they're drying out the water table, they're drying out each other. You have all the debris on the forest floor. You basically have a bunch of sick, dry trees standing close together. That is a tinderbox waiting to catch on fire. And that is directly due to the mismanagement of American forestry, which tries to maximize trees per acre, whereas our people would try to balance the trees per acre to have no more than like 13 trees per acre, is what one elder said in California. You always want to space the trees well, not only to prevent catastrophic fire, but also to make sure you have a few healthy trees rather than a bunch of sick trees. And so here on the right, we have the bison. And a lot of people imagine Native people chasing the bison with our bow and arrow and such. But right now we're seeing that the bison were chasing us. Oftentimes they were chasing our fire, and they were chasing the habitats and the grasslands that we would open up through the use of fire. So humans had a very direct influence on the scale and availability of bison in the Turtle Island continent. So I believe I am ending at five past the hour, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to move a little faster towards the end so that I don't forget some of these things. If you could pop in the chat my exact end time, that would be helpful. But one of the last case studies I want to discuss is the Mebungokre soil management. They're also known as Kayapo. And this is a thing called Amazonian dark earths, which some of you may have heard of before. So in this case study, we have on the left-hand side this really thick layer of loamy dark soil. And you also see inside of it, if you look closely, broken pottery shards. So this whole A horizon is a man-made soil system. In other words, if human beings did not exist, that dark, loamy, nutrient-dense topsoil would not exist either. And the way they create it is through a lot of burning of the Amazon rainforest floor, putting their pottery in to help to aerate and retain water, and also putting in lots of creative inputs. Anything that they grow, right, they're going to put back into the soil. Like if you grow a bunch of corn, you're going to take the corn cobs off, but then you're going to let the stalks dry and burn them so that ash and those nutrients go back into the soil. So there's all kinds of creative ways and creative inputs to make sure that soil is getting rejuvenated again and again. And on the right-hand side, we have every black dot is a place where we find Amazonian dark earths. So you can see that the entire Amazon River basin has been heavily influenced by human beings, the very soil structure. And you can see below that black A horizon, some really hard brown clay. That's actually the normal soil quality in the Amazon, much of the Amazon, which I didn't know, but apparently the Amazon actually has really poor soil quality. And that's why people had to support the soil and help it be a living soil to create a lot of support for this ecosystem. And so a lot of people think the Amazon rainforest is just this interesting, cool, wild phenomenon of nature. But now what we're seeing is that it is just as much an artifact of human creation as it is an artifact of natural processes. that humans worked with nature to create this ecosystem by creating its foundation, which is its soil. And these are just the black dots that we found, right? There could be many, many, many more. But as you can see, there's an incredible influence along the tributaries and the rivers of how the soil structure was made by human beings. Okay, so I'm going to skip forward a bit, even though I have a lot of fun examples that I could go on and on. So what are the indigenous regenerative ecosystem design characteristics? Well, some of them are, they're holistic, they're landscape scale, they're ecosystemic, they're millennial scale, meaning they're thousands of years old. A lot of them focus on expanding habitat. And we're not engineers of computers and cars, but we're engineers of ecosystems. We can create and design ecosystems, and we can all do that too if we approach it correctly. They're cage-free, fence-free, because we're just creating a home for our food. We don't have to cage it, and the stewardship mentality. So this is also found all around the world. It's not just a Native American thing. We find it in southern Norway in the Mesolithic era, thousands of years ago. They were doing the same thing. Anthropogenic burning was different from natural fires in Norway. Their fires set by people were smaller and less intense. They were predictable, almost immediately productive, creating mosaics and a complex pattern of vegetation of burnt and unburnt patches. Because they reduced available fuel, they provided protection against the disruptions of natural fires. So we find this in Africa, we find this in Australia, we find this in Asia, we find this in Pacific Islands. All around the world, human beings had much greater influence over their environments in quote unquote prehistoric times than we previously thought. So this points to us as being a gift. We don't have to be a curse. We don't have to be a virus on the earth. There are many instances where human beings have added value to the ecosystem and where they have been a keystone species, meaning a linchpin that held entire ecosystems together, which is evidenced by when they wiped out the natives, the chestnut groves collapsed, the oyster estuaries collapsed, the clam gardens collapsed. So it just shows that human beings did play a role and they needed to be there. And that's what I think is our sacred role, and our true purpose is to be keystone species, an asset to the earth. So that's indigenous regenerative ecosystem design. I want to get into the heart of the matter a little bit. We oftentimes think of humans as bad, but the body is not bad. The body is just the body. It's the software of the human mind that drives the hardware of the human body and is the program that we operate on, right? The program of our value systems, the program of our stories, our creation stories, the program of our goals as a society. That whole mental infrastructure is actually what's the rudder steering the ship of the human body. So it's not that we're bad. It's just that sometimes our worldview gets corrupted, our software gets corrupted, and it needs to be debugged, debugged from greed, debugged from selfishness, debugged from fear. These are all the things that help to steer humans to be short-sighted and make hasty decisions and do stupid things, frankly. So we're in a situation where we need to heal our software, our inner landscape, the belief systems, the value systems, the worldviews, and the languages that we speak, so that we can once again be a regenerative force on the land. So this is an example of a software, the 7 grandfather teachings of the Anishinaabe. Honesty, humility, wisdom, love, respect, bravery, truth. These are the things that govern Anishinaabe society. Each of them is represented by a different animal. This is an ancient wheel that they have been living off of for thousands of years. And this is where they came to refine their software, that their whole society runs off of these values. And I think until we adopt these values as a society, we will continue to just hit our heads against the wall. And the best we'll be able to do is technological fixes, which aren't really helping. So you could be a ruler software, which is I'm the best, or a guardian software, which is I'm a guardian, I'm a protector. And that software, which I think is well represented by Colleen Sisk, is, to guard the salmon, to guard the water. And that's what operates her every single day. When she gets out of bed, she's fighting for the salmon. The bird bath is when we give a gift to other species, like a bird bath. You're just giving a gift to the bird, like a little love note to creation. And I think we need to create more of these bird baths. whether it's a bird bath or a pollinator garden or a clam garden, or supporting the milkweed so that when the butterflies come, they have something to eat. But practice serving a species outside of your own. Practice giving, practice writing these love notes. So like, just like Saint Francis de Assisi, who was made a saint because of his service to animals and plants, we too can spiritually evolve when we start to give a crap about things outside of the human race. And that is our truest purpose, I think. So the software driving Indigenous regenerative ecosystem design, generally speaking, are these driving values: respect, reverence, reciprocity, responsibility, relationality, meaning we're all relatives to all life, kinship with life, restraint, don't take too much, right? The most important part of the harvest isn't what you take, but what you leave behind, regeneration. So the key takeaways are humanity has been a keystone species before, and we can become one again. Our technology does not need to change so much as our values do. And I would add to these takeaways that healing that inner software is just as much a part of our role as doctors, as medical practitioners, as healing the human body. We have to help heal our ethics, which is exactly what I see this conference doing. So yeah, Turtle Island, correcting the record, a densely populated, extensive managed continent. That's really what I'm trying to help people understand, that we weren't this terra nullius where nobody was living here and it was just a big wilderness. No, this was a highly curated garden, pruned, clipped, burned, thinned, cared for by Indigenous peoples in really extensive, highly densely populated societies. So thank you for taking a time to listen to that. And I think we're going to get into some Q&A now.
Okay, that was wonderful, Dr. Johnston. Thank you very much. And it really is a wonderful cap to our whole day here, because I think we've been progressing through the day of looking at tactical changes that we can make, both individually and in communities, across systems. And we're really, getting more into the heart of values, because as you said, we have to change the software, not just the hardware. The hardware won't change if the software inside doesn't change. And I loved how you brought that together. There were a couple of things I noted, some words that stood out to me that you mentioned. Bio-egalitarianism, which sounded fantastic. All things are equal and important, all a family, all akin. And co-evolution, humanity evolves in partnership, hand in hand with our relatives, all our non-human relatives. And I think you walked the line beautifully of saying we are a keystone species, because I think that can be hard for people to hear because there's been so much human exceptionalism. So it's kind of shooting the gap between, we're not saying that human beings are superior to, but we are saying we are integral to, and we have a role and responsibility in terms of stewarding in partnership and hand in hand with our relatives in our ecosystem. So I don't know if there's any more you want to say to that, just balancing human exceptionalism versus being a keystone species, because I think that's a really important point.
Yeah. It's really simple. It's that everything has a purpose. So our purpose is not better than a sparrow's purpose or a bison's purpose or a worm's purpose. We all have our ecological roles to play. And that humanity often, it's easiest for us to think, oh yeah, this otter has a purpose, it has to keep the urchins down. Or this bison has a purpose, it has to fertilize the prairie. Or this grass has a purpose, it has to feed the deer. But then like when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we're like, ooh, I'm not sure if I have a purpose. I've been too bad. I've been too much of a greedy, terrible person, but what our native languages say is we are Nahokandi and Diné. We are sacred earth surface beings. And when we call ourselves sacred, we acknowledge that we belong here. And so when we look in the mirror, Indigenous cultures have always seen, well, I shouldn't say always, but many of us came to see that we belong here. We understood that we also have an ecological role, and that creator gave us these opposable thumbs and these big brains, not to dominate the earth, but to enable us to serve the earth better. So like a parent, I always like to draw this metaphor, like a parent, right? They have way more power than their child, right? They have a bank account, they have a car, they can talk really fast, they can manipulate if the child, probably if they wanted to, but those powers were not endowed to the parent, so the parent could enslave the child, so the parent could extract from the child. These powers were vested to us to care. We have that much more ability to care for the child. So similarly, humanity was vested with all this power to be the stewards, to be the landscapers. And that's why in the Yoruba language, the word for human is chosen one. Not because we're chosen to be above, but because we were chosen by Creator to be his guardians of the animals and the plants, to be their servants, really, not above, but to be their servants, to be in service to the land. And we were put here with great purpose. And so all we have to do is remember our purpose.
And I think the idea and the conversation about purpose, it may actually be something that a lot of us with a Western mindset, at least, don't necessarily relate to that this is our purpose. Do we have a purpose here? Because we walk the earth, and referring a little bit to some of our earlier conversations, in a utilitarian approach. So we're using the planet. We don't relate to us being here with a purpose in that way, I don't think. So again, that value shift is really important. And I loved what you said about belonging. So how many of us feel that sense of belonging? There was something that came to mind as you were speaking, that and a phrase that I came across recently, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about it, that we talked about interconnection, reciprocity, connection to the land, and taking that further, we are of land, we are earth made human. So the sense of belonging to the earth, and not just walking on the earth, but we have evolved out of the earth, we have co-evolved out of the earth, we are expressions of the earth. And I think I was listening to one of your talks earlier, and you talked about how the language of all Indigenous peoples is the sound of the land speaking through humanity. I found that was beautiful, because we're not disconnected from the land whatsoever. We are outgrowth of the land.
Yes, and I say that not just as a pretty poetic phrase, but truly, these languages reflect their local ecosystems. The land is speaking through that group that has lived in that place for like my nation, we have 4 mountains that we have lived within since time immemorial. And they like to say we only got there in the 1500s, which is coincidentally right when they got there, right? So it's kind of a nice narrative of like, oh, well, they're just immigrants too. And it's like, no, we've been here a long time. So they just found 23,000-year-old footprints in New Mexico, just showing how long humanity has been there. But anyways, that little place, those 4 sacred mountains, that's our spot. And so all of our songs talk about it. All of our language talks about it. And we have the lexicon of that specific bioregion. We have the words to talk about it and to care for it. So it is poetic and pretty to think that Indigenous languages are the sound of that specific ecosystem speaking through humanity, but it is also very just factual. It's each Indigenous community stays in one place by definition. I mean, yeah, there's immigration and intermarriage, I'm not saying there's not human flow, but that language and that culture really develops out of the land, that people marry into and adopt that language and adopt that culture, and so on and so forth. So yeah, humans are the earth made human. Yeah, I love that phrase. And to me, it's like, what else would we be? Are we aliens? It's like, and I think sometimes we think we're alien. We're like this misfit, or this like accident, or this like mistake. And it's like, no, we're so meant to be here. We're so meant to be here. And when we are guided by these proper values, we are right in our pocket. We're right where we're supposed to be, and we're doing our thing. And the larger purpose of that is to create safety, to create joy, to create life, to create what my people call honjon, to create that joy and of being a part of the beauty of the earth, which might sound poetic to people, but like, have you stepped outside recently? It's just amazing, like that we live here. It's just mind blowing that we get to be, like you said, an expression of the earth's beauty. Like, what more do you want, people? Like, like it's just so miraculous and so special. And like, that's it. That's what it's about. I think she might have frozen. Oh, there you are. Hey, sorry about that.
Sorry about that too. I'm not sure if I got kicked off or if you got kicked off.
I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, I was just saying that being a part of the miracle of the beauty of creation and being an expression of it is where it's at.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
And I would actually like to just pick up a little bit on the concept of indigeneity, because you spoke about that, of like when people have been in a particular place for a very, very long time, thousands of years, defines being indigenous. And again, listening to where you speak about your ancestral lineages, you have three: Diné, Cheyenne, and European peoples, and the exploration of those lineages has led you to kind of look at those different parts of yourself, right? And I also love how you speak about how we are all indigenous. We all come from many places. We all come from many lines of people. Can we embrace that? Can we hold that irrespective of the land we walk on now? Because we all walk on the planet Earth, and we all have deep roots through our lineages. So I'm wondering if you could speak a bit more to that.
Yes, we are all indigenous. We are not all indigenous to where we stand. And that is an important distinction, because wherever I go on the planet, I always look for the native people of where I'm at and say, I look to them for leadership. Like if I go to Amsterdam, I'm talking to the forget how they say it, like Fiercy, or is this Fiercy people who were there before the kings came in and did all this crazy stuff. I like to talk when I'm in the UK. I like to talk to the Welsh. I like to talk to the Irish and the Scottish. Well, I am Scottish on my dad's side. When I go to Bali, I'm talking to the Balinese. I'm not going to talk to the, people who came in and set up shop. I want to know so wherever we go, a way that we can come to belong wherever we are is to be in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of that land. Because in theory, 99 times out of 100, they are the experts of that land. They are the experts of that place. They've been there a long time. They have a lot of institutional knowledge. So it's important not to lay claim to lands the same as indigenous peoples where you are. However, on the other hand, yes, we are all indigenous to somewhere. And I'm always trying to support people to explore those roots. So for my Scottish side, I had to go back to the UK, what they now call the UK. I had to go back to the land, and I had to feel the land, and I had to feel, who I was on that side. Because as a mixed blood, half native, half white, there's a lot of shame that sometimes goes along with that, of like, oh, I wish I wasn't white, or some people say, I wish I wasn't native, but I've come to embrace all those parts of me, because being white is actually it's part of me. And I started to look at the way the witches were burned in Europe. I started to look at the way the Scottish language was prohibited in schools. I started to look at the way the Romans would relocate people the same way, like Trail of Tears style, but in Europe. I looked at the way Constantine was conquering people in the name of Christ 1,000 years before they ever did it in the Caribbean, in Mexico, in America. So looking at the ways all of the colonization tactics that my native ancestors went through were practiced first on Europeans. And it was really hard, it was a really hard time. And as my elder Phil Lane says, hurt people, and colonized people sometimes colonize people. And so a lot of the colonization that we're experiencing here in Turtle Island is from people who were themselves really beaten down by the Romans, by the Inquisition, by the witch burnings, by the bubonic plague, all this intense stuff. So I think whether you're from India, whether you're from Hungary, whether you're from Japan, Korea, Australia, Ethiopia, Peru, wherever you're from, you come from beautiful ancestors. And if you go back far enough, we were all living in these very sophisticated, very bioegalitarian societies. And I think it's a huge misunderstanding that anything back in time is automatically, we're just more stupid, right? Like we always think, oh, whatever is going on in the past was worse than the future, because the future is always getting better. It's always getting better, right? But when I look at humanity today, I feel like we're at one of our lowest points, that we've ever been, of just ransacking things and just unbridled fear, really. And I think the ancestors who were painting pictures of bison in France 17,000 years ago, you have these beautiful cave paintings in France, 17,000 years old, that those people were far more civilized than we are today, because they honored bison, they honored the ibex, they honored the horse. You also see paintings of pregnant women. They honored women. That's way more mature, way more civilized than we are today with our Apple Watch and our Tesla. Who cares? If you're hurting people in the earth, it doesn't really matter what kind of gadgets you have, you're still uncivilized. So that's all to say that if we dig deep enough, we have venerable, beautiful ancestors that are perfectly indigenous to the place where they are from. And it's really worth looking into. It's really worth researching. Find out who you are, find out where you're from, and know that you belong in all of those places.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Johnston. I think this has been a beautiful culmination to our day. And I think I'd just like to finish with one thought. We've spoken about actions that people can take practically. And I was thinking about the environmental adages, which are like the 4 R's. We have people can refuse, reduce, reuse, repair, repurpose, return, recycle. But they're all actions. And then I was thinking about what you brought to the table and what we've been surfacing here, which are values, the values of Indigenous communities that have tended the land for millennia. And if these actions can sit on these values of different set of R's, reciprocity, reverence, respect, restraint, relationality, regeneration, and responsibility to our homeland, then I think we can change course here, and we can actually create the world that we want to create here. So thank you very much, Dr. Johnston.
Oh, thank you so much. It's quite an honor to work with you. Thank you for all your hard work.
Okay.